Negan spent years building a system designed to prevent attachment, and one kid's refusal to fear him destroyed the entire foundation. Spoilers ahead. Negan positions himself as someone who operates by rules, someone who draws clear lines about who lives, who dies, who kneels, who earns protection through submission. The death of Carl Grimes, a kid he claimed to respect, a kid whose future he said he wanted to protect, breaks something in the audience watches unravel across multiple episodes. The question the show wants you to ask is whether Negan discovers morality in that moment, whether grief teaches him the weight of his violence, whether Carl's letter plants the seed of redemption. The question the character's actual psychology demands is far simpler. What happens when someone who built an entire identity around control loses control of the one thing he believed his system could prevent before the collapse of the world? Negan was a man defined by failure to protect. He watched his wife die slowly while he failed to secure medication, failed to keep her comfortable, failed to give her a peaceful ending. The apocalypse didn't create Negan's need for dominance. It gave him permission to rebuild himself around the one lesson he extracted from that loss. He learned that powerlessness kills, that attachment without control is just waiting for pain, that the only way to survive losing everything is to never care deeply enough to lose again. The man who emerged from that grief wasn't healing. He was constructing a performance designed to eliminate vulnerability entirely. Lucille the Bat became more than a weapon. She became the physical symbol of a system where intimacy gets redirected into theatrical violence, where genuine emotion gets replaced with scripted dominance, where every relationship operates inside strict transactional boundaries he controls completely. The Saviors aren't just a gang. They're a machine built to maintain emotional distance while securing survival. Negan doesn't want loyalty through inspiration. He wants submission through fear, because fear keeps people predictable, keeps interaction scripted, keeps him safe from the chaos of actual human connection. The rules he enforces, kneel or die, work for points. Wives are chosen, not loved. Violence is public or performative. Create a world where he never has to feel powerless again because every person around him exists in a role he assigned, following scripts he wrote, performing inside boundaries he maintains through constant reinforcement. When he kills Glenn and Abraham, the brutality isn't random rage. It's a calculated demonstration designed to establish the fundamental rule of his system. You kneel, or someone you love dies while you watch. The Bat's swings aren't loss of control. They're control itself, made visible. Children occupy a specific place in Negan's system that reveals the contradictions holding the entire structure together. He states clearly, repeatedly, that he doesn't kill kids, frames his boundary as evidence of morality, uses it to differentiate himself from complete monsters. The reality his behavior demonstrates is far more self-serving. Children represent futures he can't control, grief he couldn't prevent, the complete vulnerability he watched destroy him when his wife was dying. His refusal to kill children isn't about their innocence. It's about protecting himself from the specific type of loss that broke him originally. When he interacts with Judith, he's gentle, almost playful, but the dynamic stays safely one-sided. She's a baby who can't challenge him, can't refuse the role he assigns her, can't disrupt his performance. Carl is different from the moment they meet, because Carl refuses every script Negan tries to impose. Their first real encounter in Alexandria should end with Carl dead or kneeling. Carl shoots multiple saviors, threatens Negan directly, shows zero fear while surrounded and outgunned. Negan's response makes no sense inside his established system. He doesn't kill Carl. He doesn't brutalize him. He doesn't drag him in front of Rick to demonstrate the cost of resistance. Instead, he's fascinated, almost pleased, talking to Carl like they're having a conversation instead of a hostage situation, asking questions, testing boundaries, try to understand why this kid won't perform fear like everyone else does. He takes Carl back to the sanctuary, shows him the system, explains the rules, offers him a tour of the machine like he's trying to earn approval from someone whose opinion somehow matters. The interaction exposes something Negan's performance normally hides. He's desperate for validation from someone who sees him clearly, someone who isn't performing submission out of terror. Carl sees through performance immediately because Carl grew up in the apocalypse without the option of pretending the world is controllable. Carl watched his mother die in childbirth, shot her himself to prevent her from turning, survived knowing that love doesn't protect anyone, that control is an illusion, that the only honest response to this world is accepting you can't prevent loss. When Negan performs dominance, Carl doesn't see strength. He sees someone still pretending the old rules apply. Someone still trying to build systems that make sense. Someone afraid of the same chaos Carl accepted years ago. That's what fascinates Negan. Carl isn't brave or stupid. He's genuinely unimpressed. Genuinely operating from a psychology Negan can't dominate because Carl already internalized a lesson Negan is still trying to escape. Negan wants Carl to see him as powerful, as inevitable, as someone who figured out how to win. Carl sees him as someone still performing control because he's terrified of facing the alternative. When Carl dies, everything about how he dies dismantles Negan's system piece by piece. Carl doesn't die because of Negan's violence. He dies from a random bite that happened while he was trying to help someone Negan would have considered weak, pointless, not worth the risk. Carl doesn't die kneeling or broken or begging. He dies on his own terms, writing letters, giving instructions, facing the end with the same clarity he faced everything else. The letter Carl writes to Negan is a final dismantling. A kid who never feared him, never submitted to him, never accepted the performance, telling Negan exactly what he should become, offering him a vision of the future that requires abandoning everything the system was built to protect. The letter doesn't ask Negan to be good. It asks him to be human, which from Carl's perspective means accepting you can't control outcomes, can't prevent loss, can't build walls high enough to keep grief out. Negan's reaction to Carl's death reveals what he actually fears beneath all performance. He doesn't cry because he discovered morality. He cries because someone he couldn't control, couldn't dominate, couldn't fit into a system, died anyway. All the rules, all the violence, all the carefully maintained boundaries didn't prevent this loss. Carl's death proves that Negan's entire system is built on a lie, that fear can create safety, that dominance can prevent grief, that if you control people hard enough, you won't have to feel powerless again. Carl died helping someone, died outside Negan's influence, died proving that connection matters more than survival, that caring about people is worth the inevitable loss. Everything about how Carl lived and died contradicts every survival mechanism Negan built after his wife's death. The letter forces Negan to confront a simple question. If the system can't prevent loss, what was the violence for? The show chooses redemption, chooses to have Negan slowly transform into someone who honors Carl's vision, someone who tries to build something better. Someone who earns a quiet ending helping the communities he once terrorized. The character's established psychology suggests a different path entirely. Someone who built an identity around control doesn't learn to let go because one person died. They double down. They reinforce the system. They prove that the problem wasn't the rules, but the failure to enforce them completely. A logically consistent Negan doesn't soften after Carl's death. He becomes more rigid, more isolated, more convinced that attachment itself is the weakness that needs to be eliminated. He stops making exceptions, stops showing interest in people as individuals, stops performing charisma entirely, because charisma is just another form of connection that creates vulnerability. The alternate path has 3 inevitable steps. First, Negan returns to Sanctuary and eliminates every relationship that resembles friendship, every interaction that feels personal, every wife, every lieutenant, every person who might matter enough to hurt him if they died. The system stays intact, but Negan removes himself from it emotionally, becomes a pure enforcer of rules he no longer even pretends to enjoy. Second, Rick's communities become a problem not because they resist, but because they represent exactly what Carl's letter described. People choosing connection over safety, choosing to care about each other despite knowing it guarantees grief. Negan can't allow that model to succeed because if it works, it proves his entire system was unnecessary suffering, proves he chose isolation when community was possible. The war becomes personal in a different way. He's not trying to dominate them. He's trying to eliminate proof that he was wrong. Third, Negan eventually self-destructs not through redemption, but through the complete isolation his psychology demanded from the beginning. He builds a world where no one matters, where every interaction is transactional, where he's completely safe from loss because he's completely alone. The system achieves its goal perfectly, and the cost is exactly what Carl tried to warn him about. Surviving isn't living, control isn't safety, and preventing attachment doesn't prevent grief. It just guarantees you face the end with nothing. The show's redemption arc satisfies the audience's desire to see people change, To believe that grief teaches that we can evolve past our worst survival mechanisms. The character's actual psychology suggests something darker and more consistent. Some people build systems because facing the alternative is unbearable, and when those systems fail, they don't learn flexibility. They learn that the system wasn't strict enough. Carl didn't break Negan's need for control. He proved that control was always impossible. What Negan does with that proof determines whether he's a character who evolves or a character who calcifies. The show chose evolution. The psychology points towards someone who would rather be alone and safe than connected and vulnerable. Someone who would rather enforce a system that doesn't work than admit the violence was always just grief he couldn't process. If you build a system to prevent feeling powerless, every loss proves the system failed, which means the system needs to be stronger, which means you end up completely alone, which means you finally feel powerless anyway. Carl knew that from the beginning.